All right, welcome everyone. I'd like to thank you for joining today's webinar titled Southern Wind Energy Opportunities. My name is Kyle James and I'm the Development and Outreach Coordinator for the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. Before we get started, I would like to review the basic functions of the WebEx control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. To ensure sound quality, all attendee lines will be muted throughout this presentation. Go ahead and find the 3 buttons along the bottom on your control panel. If you are having any trouble hearing or seeing the slides, click the blue chat button and type in your problem so that I can help you troubleshoot. We have saved time at the end of this presentation to answer questions about today's topic. To ask a question, click the question mark button along the bottom of your screen. Make sure all panelists is showing up in the drop-down menu. Then type your question into the questions text box. We'll do our best to answer questions in the order that we do receive them. And with that, I would like to turn it over to our presenter today, the Director of the Southern Wind Energy Association, Simon Mahan.
Thanks, Kyle. Can you hear me?
Yep, sounds great.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. As Kyle mentioned, my name is Simon Mahan. I'm the Director of the Southern Wind Energy Association, and today we're going to talk about some southern wind energy opportunities. The point of today's webinar is to really stress how low-cost wind energy really has become in about the past 5 years. And because of some expiring federal tax incentives for wind energy, this year and early next year are really the right time to be purchasing large quantities of wind energy, either from outside of the region or possibly from wind farms currently underdeveloped even within the region. So with that, if you're not too familiar with the Southern Wind Energy Association, we are an industry-led initiative that promotes the responsible use and development of wind throughout the South. Our vision is for wind energy to become a leading source of energy in the region, and our geographic region covers these 11 states shown on the map off to the right here. Today's webinar, we'll be talking about some pricing trends, some recent pricing trends, existing activities within the region, opportunities for wind energy throughout the South, the production tax credit and its impending phase out, utility planning opportunities, and then some next steps to consider when talking about wind energy procurement. With that, let's go ahead and dive in and talk about some pricing trends. This chart is from Lazard Associates, where they update every single year showing the different levelized costs of energy in $1 per megawatt hour for not only wind energy. The entire report available talks about all generation technologies. However, Lazard last year pulled out wind energy and looked at the recent costs of wind power across the country. As you can see, wind power prices have declined by about 60% over the past 5 years. It's a significant decline, and most recent cost estimates here of $32 per megawatt hour on up to $77 per megawatt hour are an unsubsidized cost. And I do want to stress that this is without the production tax credit. And when compared against other generation resources, which we'll do here in a second, you can see that wind energy is a very low-cost energy resource available today. The final thing I do want to mention on this chart is there is a range from $32 to $77 per megawatt hour, and that's predominantly caused by different financing structures, different types of wind regimes. So you'd expect a very windy location, perhaps in the middle of the country, to be at the lower end of the scale, whereas lower wind speed areas like in the South might be a little higher in the scale. I'm not quite sure that they'd go all the way up to $77, but certainly they would be a little bit more expensive. Next, as I mentioned, this is the rest of the chart from Lazard Associates showing wind energy with the red arrow pointing next to it compared to all other commercially available generation technologies out in the market today. And as you can see, wind energy at a cost of $32 per megawatt hour, unsubsidized, competes very well and favorably against all generation technologies, including many of the natural gas technologies, coal, nuclear, and solar resources. Nevertheless, there are some opportunities here in the South where we may be able to consider these different, or this range of wind energy resources available to us today. As another way to kind of evaluate the power purchase agreement prices of wind power, The Lawrence Berkeley National Lab recently published a study this past August that compares these red lines of median wind power purchase agreement prices in the middle of the country and generated weighted average wind power purchase agreement prices against this blue wedge. This blue wedge is the range of the Energy Information Administration's Annual Energy Outlook 2016 for the natural gas fuel cost projections looking into the future. Importantly, the blue wedge does not include the capital, financial, or operations and maintenance costs associated with existing natural gas facilities. So this is really the fuel avoided cost of natural gas. And what this chart is really showing is that a long-term power purchase agreement that effectively many utilities may be able to sign today competes very well against natural gas price projections looking off into the future. Now that we've already looked at some of the recent price trends and how wind power is a low-cost energy resource, let's move on into some existing activities here in the South. The base map here with all the different blue-colored states indicate the amount of megawatts of wind power installed in those particular states. So you can see the darker states like Texas, Iowa, and California have a substantial quantity of wind power already installed, whereas here in the South, we hardly have any wind energy installed. In fact, we have one wind farm that is currently operating. It's the Buffalo Mountain Project in Tennessee. That project has been in operation for about a decade. Now, there is a brand new wind farm being constructed in eastern North Carolina. That's the Amazon Wind Project. And it will be the first modern large-scale project in the South, and with a capacity of 208 megawatts. Now, if you do want to compare that against some of these other states like Texas, which is leading the country in wind farm development, Texas has over 17,000 megawatts of wind farm capacity already in existence. We do believe, though, that because of newer turbine technology, predominantly taller turbines, which are able to reach higher wind speeds and better wind speeds, along with longer blades or larger rotor diameters, more wind farm development is going to occur here in the South over the next 5 to 10 years. And we do know of a number of wind farm developments in just about every single state within the region. So the cost component of wind coming down, in addition to the improving technology, means that the South is really opening up as a new frontier for the wind energy market. Even though we don't have an awful lot of wind farm development actively and publicly going on right now, there are a number of utilities that are already purchasing substantial quantities of wind energy from other parts of the country. In fact, this chart goes to show that a number of utilities, including Alabama Power, Appalachian Power, Arkansas Electric, Georgia Power, Gulf Power, SWEPCO here in Louisiana, as well as TVA, have already contracted for about 4,000 megawatts, very close to 4,000 megawatts or 4 gigawatts worth of wind energy capacity from all over the country. And each one of these red lines or red arrows indicates approximately where the wind energy is flowing from and where it is flowing to. So you can see we have a number of utilities buying wind energy from Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas, as well as Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana. These resources are extremely low cost and extremely effective at being integrated into these utilities right now. In fact, the perception of wind energy from utilities across the region is quite favorable. Here are a number of quotes from some of these larger utilities, including TVA, Georgia Power, Alabama Power, and SWEPCO. And I want to point out here the predominant force that's causing these utilities to buy wind power is that it is a clean, low-cost domestic energy resource. Very few of our states have a mandate to purchase renewable energy. And so the vast majority of wind power contracts that have already been signed for the region and are currently flowing into the region is strictly on a cost basis. So because wind energy is such a low-cost energy resource, these utilities are voluntarily buying it. Now that we've kind of looked at what has already occurred here in the region, let's look at some near-term opportunities. Whenever we talk about wind energy opportunities within the South, we like to look at kind of three different options. The first option is that we import wind energy from other parts of the country through existing transmission lines, and that's already been shown in the previous slide. An additional new opportunity are high voltage direct current transmission projects that are being constructed or planned to be constructed that would connect extremely high capacity factor wind energy resources directly into the South. And then third and finally, in-state energy resources. So as I mentioned previously, newer, taller turbines with longer blades enables an economic development of wind throughout the region. Now, each one of these energy resources is unique and it's special. And because of that, when utilities or corporate purchasers are evaluating wind energy opportunities, there's a real need to look at these different types of wind energy resources and evaluate them on their own merits. For instance, whenever you import wind energy from the Southwestern Power Pool, which is kind of through the middle of the country, Oklahoma and Kansas, and so forth, or the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, or MISO, which is kind of the northern Midwest, those energy resources are quite good. They do have a very high capacity factor of between 45 to 50%. They have extremely low costs. We've seen power purchase agreements in the low $20 per megawatt hour range, but there is a variable transmission charge associated with it. So the transmission charge is quite low. However, that transmission charge can change over time. So that is a unique attribute to those energy resources. Alternatively, high voltage direct current transmission offers the best high capacity factor wind energy resources. They're able to access the absolute highest capacity factors in, for instance, western Oklahoma or western Texas, and deliver extremely low cost power purchase agreements of $20 per megawatt hour or less. That's 2 cents per kilowatt hour. There is an additional improved capacity associated with these lines where you can actually oversubscribe the transmission lines and make them appear to be operating at a more stable rate. And these do have a fixed transmission charge. So unlike an imported SPP or MISO resource, you have a sense of how much that transmission line is going to cost over the long term. Finally, the in-state wind energy resources, they will have a lower capacity factor simply because the wind is not nearly as robust in the South as other parts of the country. Nevertheless, we have seen a number of projects and data that suggest a 30 to 40% capacity factor in many parts of the region. They do have a little bit of a higher cost because you do have to purchase a more advanced turbine. However, there is little to no transmission requirement or risk associated with these resources since they're located next to load, and there are additional in-state economic benefits associated with these resources. So we encourage everybody, when you're looking at wind energy resources, to think about these different opportunities. Specifically, as I was mentioning previously, SPP or MISO resources or imported wind energy resources are readily available today, and as mentioned previously, about 3.8, close to 4 gigawatts worth of wind energy contracts are already underway. And as I mentioned, HVDC transmission projects are also being evaluated for the region. We do have 2 projects that are being evaluated. The first one here is the Plains and Eastern Clean Line. That project would connect about 4,000 megawatts of wind energy from western Oklahoma to a substation in northern Arkansas, as well as a substation in Memphis, Tennessee. Once it reaches those substations, it can be transmitted through MISO South or wheeled through TVA to other southern utilities. The second HVDC project that we have in our backyard is the Pattern Energy Southern Cross. Now this project is a little bit unique in that it would intertie with the ERCOT transmission system within Texas, enabling it to reach some of Texas's best wind energy resources. The total amount for this project is estimated to be about 2 gigawatts worth of wind energy, and the power would be delivered to a brand new converter station in Mississippi. Finally, as I mentioned before, the newer turbines with taller hub heights and longer blades really opens up the entire region for wind development. This map is a unique wind energy map that not a lot of folks may have seen, but it's produced by the National Renewable Energy Lab. And what NREL is trying to show here with the darker areas is the available land that is out there for wind farm development based off of a 35% capacity factor or greater using a 110 meter hub height turbine. So the hub or the generator part of the turbine would sit about 330 feet up into the air. As you can see here, each state has thousands of megawatts of wind energy potential throughout much of the region. And we're not suggesting that all of these wind energy resources are going to be developed, nor should they. The point of this is that the newer turbines have really opened up these areas. Even just a few years ago, had you looked at a 80-meter hub height turbine, for instance, many of these states would have shown zero wind energy potential at a 35% capacity factor. So just by going up a little bit in height and increasing the blade length, you substantially increase the amount of developable area in these states. Now that we've kind of looked at these opportunities, let's move on and talk specifically about the production tax credit and its effect on procuring wind energy resources here in the near term. Back in December, Congress passed a long-term phase-out of the federal production tax credit for wind energy, effectively for a wind project that begins construction this year in 2016. That wind farm can qualify for 100% of the production tax credit. Currently, the production tax credit is quantified at $23 per megawatt hour. Next year, this is a phase out, and so the production tax credit would decline in value by 20%. So a project that waits to begin construction until 2017 would have to forego a certain quantity of the production tax credit, and so on and so forth. So in 2018, there's a 20% reduction again. In 2019, another further 20% erosion. And then finally in 2020, the production tax credit expires. But I do want to point out and dive a bit more technically here into the value of the production tax credit because it is heavily dependent on the project's ability to monetize those tax credits. And I'll show you what that means here with this slide. Now this slide and this chart comes from a study completed by Lawrence Berkeley National Lab just a few years ago, where they asked the question, what does a production tax credit phase out look like to different types of wind farm developers? So here we've effectively got three different types of wind farm development company, if you can think of it like that. The first is the red dotted line. The red dotted line is a wind farm developer that has no tax appetite. So this may be a public utility that decides to build a wind farm on their own, but they have no tax liability. Because the production tax credit is a tax credit, and you don't have any tax liability from a public power producer, there's no way that they can monetize the production tax credit. Thus, there's no way that they can capture its value and reduce the rate of a power purchase agreement or a levelized cost of energy associated with that particular wind farm. So as you can see, that wind farm from point A all the way to point F, their wind farm would cost about $60 per megawatt hour. I do want to mention here, all of the assumptions are basically that a wind farm would use a commercially available turbine and have an installed cost of $1,800 per kilowatt and a capacity factor of 40%. So all of these developers are effectively using the same price and receiving the same capacity factor. And really the only change here is how they're able to monetize the production tax credit. So that's an important piece to note here. Now, the second type of developer here is this black line. This is a wind farm developer that is maybe a smaller wind farm developer or a medium-sized developer, and they have to rely on tax equity in order to finance their project. And so they may not have a large tax base in order to monetize the production tax credit. And so what they'll do instead is they'll partner in order to receive tax equity. And then the tax equity partners can then use the production tax credit. When they do this, though, they do see a decline in their overall power purchase agreement, which is a good thing. But at a certain point, the higher cost of tax equity relative to debt financing, for instance, is disadvantageous to them. And so these developers may start out at point B with a $45 per megawatt hour and a 100% production tax credit. As you can see, by the time you drop to an 80% production tax credit, which you can see kind of along the bottom axis here, the price increases by about $5, and then on through to point D. Now, once this mid to small size wind farm developer hits point D, it is more advantageous for them to forego the production tax credit and stop using tax equity. And instead, they can use cheaper forms of financial investment. And thus, they would end up following the same line as the developer that had no tax appetite. So in effect, for this small to mid-sized developer, you may be looking at a price from about $45 on up to point F, which is about $60 per megawatt hour. But then the third wind farm developer here is the one that can completely monetize it. So this is a large wind farm developer. Wind may be just a portion of their full portfolio. They may develop wind farms and solar projects and natural gas facilities, etc. And from that, they're able to capture the value of the production tax credit a bit better. So from point C, these developers are able to monetize the production tax credit better, and so their low-cost power purchase agreement price is just going to be below $40 a megawatt hour. And then as the PTC is phased out, the price overall increases over time. So the point of this is that as the PTC phases out, there's a real direct harm or increase in the real levelized power purchase agreement prices associated with wind farms of those years that they're installed. This chart is also from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. This is just a numerical evaluation of those charts that I just showed. Here we've broken it into a real power purchase agreement priced in dollars per megawatt hours versus nominal dollars per megawatt hours. And here again, we've got the two different types of developers that can use a production tax credit. That's your tax equity liability. So that's the small to medium-sized developer compared to a sponsor tax liability that's effectively a larger wind developer. And so you can see here the real numerical values of what a 100% versus 80% versus 60% and 40% production tax credit does. And so you can see that there's an increase in price over time. This chart I've just recreated from the previous chart showing what the actual dollar value increase is based on each reduction in the production tax credit. And so in the most conservative case here, we have a real dollar power purchase agreement in dollars per megawatt hours for a large wind farm developer. And it looks like that for every year that a developer waits to begin construction, they lose about $3 per megawatt hour in value associated with the production tax credit. And so in turn, what we did was we took that figure, the $3.10 per megawatt hour of the value that's lost every year, and calculated what would it look like for a very large utility or corporate buyer to buy 1,000 megawatts of wind energy or a gigawatt of wind energy, and what would it look like to wait each year. And so in effect, this is an extremely conservative number here, but effectively by waiting a single year into 2017, the utility or the corporate buyer would forego about $217 million in savings associated with the production tax credit just by waiting to begin construction of that wind farm just by a single year. Now I do want to point out the good thing about these figures is that they're linear. So if you are not as ambitious and not looking for 1,000 gigawatts or 1,000 megawatts of wind energy, and let's say you're only looking for 100 megawatts, you would still forego $21.7 million just by waiting a single year. And then it does get compounded every year hereafter based off of the 2016 price. Now that we can have a better understanding of the PTC phase out and what's coming here in the near future, there's some really important ramifications that utilities and corporate purchasers need to take into consideration when evaluating these wind energy contracts. So as I mentioned, Congress passed the extension of the production tax credit back in December. However, it wasn't until May of 2016 that the IRS issued their clarifying guidance. So with that, they defined what commence construction means. And in effect, a wind developer has to undertake some sort of significant physical work or expend 5% of the total project cost in order to safe harbor qualify for a particular year. There is a continuity requirement that the developer has to effectively finish the project within 4 calendar years. And there is some special new language regarding the completion of construction on a new transmission line, and we anticipate that that is in regards to these new HVDC transmission lines. So in effect, IRS basically says that a 2016 wind farm that begins construction this year can still receive the 100% PTC, the $23 per megawatt hour, so long as they are placed in service as late as December 31st, 2020. What that means is that utilities and purchasers, they can contract for wind energy this year to lock in the production tax credit and then accept delivery within 4 years. They can take 4 years between today and December 31st, 2020 to figure out how to best incorporate these wind energy resources, best evaluate where those wind energy resources fit in their total diversified portfolio. Now here I'm providing some illustrative examples of high voltage direct current transmission projects versus SPP and MISO projects versus in-region projects. So some of these numbers you've seen before, like the higher capacity factors for the HVDC relative to the lower capacity factors for the in-region wind energy resources. We've also used some installed cost dollars per kilowatt from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab's most recent market assessment report for wind energy. And we've calculated out what the power purchase agreement price could look like for some of those resources. Now, it does depend on what type of resource you get versus the actual contractual costs. So take this again as an illustrative example, not as the only way to evaluate these projects. And additionally, there would be some additional transmission charges for the HVDC and SPP MISO resources. But what you can see here is that if you have a 2016 project, an HVDC project, for instance, $18 per megawatt hour is an extremely attractive rate. But if you wait a single year to sign up, you will be foregoing that $3, and you'll be foregoing $3 every year thereafter if you wait and continue to wait. So by the end of the production tax credit, if you wait until it's completely gone, you'll be foregoing about $9 shown here on up to $15 when the production tax credit is totally gone. So for a phase-out plan, utilities and corporate buyers can sign power purchase agreements this year with certain conditions and certain protections. The developers can safe harbor for this year and qualify for the 2016 PTC, and then delivery doesn't have to take place immediately. It can take place anytime between now and within 4 years. So let's go back to the slide that we talked about earlier from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, where we compared a low-cost power purchase agreement from wind of about $25 to $27 per megawatt hour against the fuel-only cost associated with natural gas projections looking into the future. And then we're overlaying our illustrative examples and when they qualify for the production tax credit. So here we have a 2016 qualified PPA for in-region SPP and HVDC wind energy resources. We have their latest delivery shown here at the end is that 4-year length in time. And then also the reference natural gas fuel costs kind of median line in here. And as you can see, many of these resources are quite cost competitive with wind energy or with natural gas resources whenever you project them out into the future. And so instead of evaluating today's 2016 wind energy cost against today's 2016 spot natural gas market, for instance, what utilities and corporate purchasers need to be doing instead is evaluating today's 2016 power purchase agreements costs from wind energy against natural gas projections all the way out to December 31st, 2020. And when you do that, you can see that there's a significant cost savings associated with that. And then finally, what we did here is we just overlaid the slight increase in costs associated with these wind contracts because of the step down in the production tax credit. So slowly over time, the cost of these resources are expected to slowly go up. Nevertheless, they will still be quite cost competitive. It's just that if you sign a contract this year, you can lock in some of the lowest prices for wind energy available, and we're not quite sure that these prices are are going to come back sometime in the near term. Of course, there are advances happening with wind energy, and wind turbines are continuing to improve, but to assure an extremely low-cost wind energy resource, utilities and corporate buyers need to be acting today and early 2017 in order to secure those products. So now that we've got an understanding of the PTC and how to plan for that, let's talk about next steps. There's a number of things that can be done for utilities and corporate purchasers to sign up for wind energy as soon as possible. The first one here is that conducting bilateral negotiations for unsolicited proposals. This seems to be a pretty popular way for wind developers to get information to utilities or to corporate buyers. It also can speed things along, especially if there are regulatory allowances for unsolicited proposals. The next is to issue an RFI, a request for information, or a request for proposals for specific and up-to-date wind energy resource information. This can be a good opportunity if it's moved quickly. If RFIs or RFPs take multiple years for weighing bids and evaluating proposals, a lot of the times wind developers will offer a proposal to multiple utilities if the timeline is too long. And so really speed is of the essence. And so a utility that has a fast moving RFP process can scoop up the best wind energy contracts and effectively beat out other utilities that have a longer process in place. Another thing to consider or to take into consideration is how utilities and corporate buyers use integrated resource planning and evaluating the cost of wind energy resources that are available today and the pricing available today on out to 2020 and how the PTC affects those pricing options for importing wind, for HVDC wind, and then also in-region wind. And then finally, the last thing to take into consideration is the Federal Clean Power Plan and its Clean Energy Incentive Program. The CEIP is specifically designed to incent renewables such as wind and solar, and we've seen that through the CEIP, utilities can import wind energy resources and still use those credits to comply with the Federal Clean Power Plan to reduce greenhouse gases. And as I mentioned before, RFPs and RFIs are a fair way to collect information and actually develop contracts and receive proposals from wind energy developers. Here's just a short list of a number of utilities that we've tracked throughout the region that just this year have made some sort of announcement. They've either released a request for proposals for renewable energy or wind specifically, or they've issued a request for information for renewables or wind specifically. And here you can kind of see the relative dates associated with some of these. SWEPCO, for instance, here in Louisiana, just issued their RFP back in August, just last month, and proposals were due just a week or two ago. And so they're on a very fast time frame in order to evaluate the proposals, select the winning contract, and then they're on the right track here if they're interested in securing a 2016 power purchase agreement. And with that, that concludes our webinar. And so thank you so much for everybody that's been able to attend this afternoon. If you have any questions whatsoever, you can feel free to contact me at simon@southernwind.org, or you can check out the website at www.southernwind.org. With that, I think we'll go into questions here. And I'm seeing our first question is, how much wind is there 10 miles off the coast of Georgia, and is it sufficient to support a large-scale offshore project? So we don't talk about offshore wind in our presentation today, in part because offshore wind development takes a substantially longer time to develop. And so the production tax credit is of the utmost urgency in order to secure the lowest cost wind energy resources. So it's unlikely that an offshore wind farm could pop up off of the coast of Georgia in the next year or so. In fact, a number of our states are undergoing leasing evaluations, leasing activity in the federal areas that would be about 3 miles or further off the coast for South Carolina, in North Carolina, and then also there was a lease awarded, I think it was last year, earlier this year, off the coast of Virginia. Georgia is not yet working in that realm of a leasing activity for offshore wind. So Georgia's a little bit further off than its neighboring northerner states. Okay. If you have any other questions, you can type them in the question box, and we should be able to get those. Okay. Well, we're not seeing anything else, so I do want to thank everyone for their time. And again, if you do have any follow-up questions or we happen to miss your question, feel free to shoot me an email at simon@southernwind.org. We will have this presentation and a video associated with it available on our website very soon. Thank you very much, and have a great day.